In the general election in the UK last week, Labour won a overwhelming majority of seats in Parliament. Share of their vote grew by just about 2% or so. So it grew, not by a lot. And they mostly won because the Conservatives lost, as they have done their best to make sure that they do. And but one thing that hasn't been talked about a lot, and we can guess why, is the Muslim vote. So in areas where there is a large Muslim population in the UK, Labour lost a lot of its percentage, voting percentage from the previous election in 2019. Um, Again, this is the party that won this election decisively, but in areas where many Muslims live, Labour lost. Why is that? Well, apparently, for many Muslims in Britain, this was a one-issue election. That one issue being the war in Gaza, Hamas's war on Israel, and Labour's, I would say, insufficient support for Hamas, although I don't think that's how the Muslim population in the UK would put it. They would say that Labour is pro-Israel, which of course would completely ignore everything that the Labour leader has said for quite a few months. But yeah, I don't know. I see this as a serious problem. I see this as something that scares me about the country that I live in, and I want to find out if I am right or if I'm just racist against Muslims, which I hear is a thing nowadays. So I have three people here to explain it to me. I'm joined by Richard, Marco, Michael. Richard, I will start with you.
Sure. Okay. Well, there's many ways into this story. One of them is obviously the fact that five independent candidates who stood on a pro-Palestine agenda, one of which was Jeremy Corbyn, were elected as MPs in this election. But there's also a lot more that's going on apart from that, because lots of Muslim votes went to different parties in different areas. And I'm in the course of this show, I'd like to pull out some of the information which leads you to the wider picture here. Because if you solely focus on only five seats changed hands over this issue, then you are absolutely missing the point. But overall, one of the key things that's come out of this election and from the analysis of it in terms of the Muslim vote has been the extent to which within constituencies with larger Muslim populations, the amount of Muslim vote going to Labour dropped by larger amounts the larger the constituencies were. Now, for example, where there was only like 10 to 20% of a population in a given area was Muslim, the Labour share fell by 7%. But as we go up to the 20 to 30 range, it fell by 15%. When we get to 30-40 range, it fell by 30%. And for constituencies with over 40% of Muslims in them, the Labour share fell by nearly 34%. As their votes went elsewhere because they were unhappy that the Labour policy, primarily on Gaza, wasn't strong enough, despite how much we've criticised it on this channel and how clearly pro-Gaza it is in many ways. So I think that's probably a good opening point.
Yeah, people are totally free to evade reality as much as they like. However, as Ayn Rand pointed out, they're not free to avoid the consequences of doing so. They can be as irrational as they like if they really hate their own life and not go by their own mind. They can aspire to the role model of a corpse nailed to a stick if they want to. They can study magical books. They can believe in Santa or worship nature or any sky-dwelling spirit that they wish. However, when you use religious mumbo jumbo in order to justify a genocidal act, that it's not only mysticism, but it's pure racism. And again, as Ayn Rand observed, if a group of racists is small enough, you can call it ethnicity. And that's exactly what we're seeing now translate into politics here in Britain. There are groups of people who are actually racist, who are applying racism in their policy. And it turned into a sectarian religious movement, effectively. We had before one issue parties like the Brexit Party, for example, or like now the Rejoin EU Party. The only purpose for this party was actually to deliver Brexit or destroy Brexit. That's fine. But when your main point is to support a sort of racial sectarian hate, which only ends up supporting Hamas effectively in the creation of a racist state, which is closed and hostile to civilized people, and has got the Jews at the top of the list of the hit list. Well, we are in a different league now. We are observing, we are effectively living in a world where we are accepting this kind of hate, and we entrenching it in our institutions.
So, Michael, you don't live in the UK, but you split your time between Israel and the US. In Israel, the Muslim vote is also something that is kind of well known as its own thing. In the US, it's more of an issue this year, I think, than ever before. Also around the war between Hamas and Israel. Yeah, what are your thoughts on the Muslim vote in the UK and elsewhere, or am I racist for even asking?
No, I think we all know that a lot of these name calling only applies when Jews do it. Otherwise, it's completely in the name of furthering what's only due to folks through some sort of weird social justice, which of course in itself is a contradiction in terms. That is to say, you either have justice or you don't, and you have to have a set of principles that apply to everybody as equally as possible to do that, and of course aspiring to pure equality to the extent that humans can deliver. We have a similar but even more stupid trend in the US in terms of disavowing facts and not really thinking about what you're talking about. And in many cases in the US, as you know, not even knowing what you're talking about. I mean, having a fundamental lack of knowledge and being proud of it, by the way, because you've jumped on the latest bandwagon of so-called progressive thought. Even the name is scary. We have in the US more Jews than Muslims, and yet we have a lot of Jews that will vote on the same side of the Muslims against other Jews, and we have a lot of Jews that continue to support college institutions that are actively supporting terrorism, and so on. And we have a president who is clearly trying to get votes, particularly in Michigan and Minnesota, which is where the larger Muslim populations are, and has therefore not come out, other than his speech on October 7th, when he said, "Don't mess with Israel because we will basically protect them." He didn't say that exactly, but he said don't, and everybody did, and he didn't do anything about it. And by the way, you know, catching a few Iranian missiles on their way over to Israel is not supporting Israel. That's playing catch, and that's not, that's no way to fight a war. And he has been completely ambivalent about this, speaking out of all sides of his mouth, and his deputy Blinken is a total disaster, and has no credibility. Neither Biden nor Blinken have any credibility on the world stage at all, and that's for sure. The issue with the Muslims in all of these places, it seems to me, certainly as an American and as an Israeli, and ironically, I think it's actually worse in the US and the UK than it is here in Israel. Because a lot of Arabs that are Muslim in Israel, and there are a few Christian Arabs left, let's everybody remember there are some Christian Arabs, and they're in Israel, and they have good rights, just like the Muslim Arabs have rights. The Muslim Arabs in Israel have more rights than most of the Muslim countries that they would otherwise go to. But in the US and the UK, there's complete ignorance about what's going on here. And that's one of the reasons that the lack of ignorance, or the less ignorant Arabs here in Israel, actually appreciate what Israel has done for everyone in this region, including providing more jobs, more income, more better lives, more health benefits, and so on, than any other country that surrounds anywhere in the Middle East, unless you're part of the royal family in Saudi Arabia or something like that. I mean, these are well-documented facts. So how anybody could support a pathway towards not only Hamas, but just generally supporting this notion that Gaza is a good place, and that Hamas, which governed it or purported to govern it, did anything good for its people, it just doesn't support the facts. And the unfortunate thing is that if that group doesn't relinquish power, then the people in this area, in Gaza and in the Palestinian Authority areas, will continue to have the miserable, wretched existence that they have. And no matter how many college campuses and no matter how many groups in the UK, go against that, it's still going to be miserable. And this is exactly what you said. Facts matter, and the facts are extremely clear in this case. And yet people want to continue to do this. I'll add one other thing. This is not new in the US. When George Floyd, who was a convicted criminal, was inappropriately murdered, absolutely no question he was murdered, and the policeman who did it is convicted, okay? But the answer was to defund the police. This is complete stupidity. It's been known for a long time that this is complete stupidity. The effect of defunding the police has been an increase in the death of black men in inner cities. Let me say that again. The Black Lives Matter movement, which really proposed and backed up this entire goal to defund the police, has led to increased death amongst black males in inner cities. And actually, I believe children as well. We don't talk about that in the US because that's considered racist, because it's the truth. And absolutely the same thing is going to recapitulate itself with the Muslim populations and crime and so on and so forth, and all the things attached to Sharia law and so on, that most of the Muslims that want to recapitulate a Muslim country want to do in the US and in the UK. This will happen again there.
Yeah, I remember on October 8th, Black Lives Matter Chicago posted this cartoon, this kind of drawing, romanticizing a paraglider as I guess, freedom fighter. Of course, paragliders flew into Israel and slaughtered people, which Black Lives Matter, was supportive of. So, much like when Hamas says that dead Palestinians is a good thing for them, I think maybe dead black people is good for Black Lives Matter, ironically, considering their name. Michael, I don't know if this made the headlines or was reported much outside the UK, and this is a while back, but there was a machete terrorist attack by a Muslim in an underground station maybe a decade ago, and some guy there, the terrorist didn't get to attack many people, but somebody who was there famously said in what I can only consider statement appropriate English, said to him, "You ain't no Muslim, bruv." And then the prime minister repeated that and so on. I think that's a thing in the West. Westerners want to tell Muslims what Islam is and that it's not actually the Islam that they follow. Many of them, of course, not all, but many of them do follow the more consistent version, the version closer to the Prophet Muhammad, the version where you slaughter the infidels. But no, we want to believe that those aren't the real Muslims. The real Muslims are really peaceful, loving victims of Islamophobia, and yeah, the real problem is when those other people are there, live and prevent the Muslims from whatever it is. that the world that they prefer to live in. Richard.
I wanted to focus on the Muslim Vote organization itself, which is one of those that advised people of Muslims which candidate to vote for in all sorts of constituencies. They analysed how many Muslims there were in a given constituency, and then argued which one you should vote for based on how they'd voted in Parliament concerning whether they were ready to whether the existing candidates were ready to recognise the state of Palestine or not, and all those kind of things. Because that was quite telling, because at the end of the election, when the results were announced, the Muslim Vote came out with a statement saying what they thought of the actual result. And they said this, and this is a quote from them: "To all the naysayers who said the Muslim community can never unite, can never coordinate, tonight you had your answer. We take one step towards the Almighty, and then His help comes raining down." That was their conclusion off the back of it. And I think it's important to look at not just the Israel-Gaza issue. That is important for even among the Muslims. That's obviously more important. I think I saw a statistic which said that among people generally in the UK, it was only 3% thought that was the most important issue when they were voting this election, and about a quarter of Muslims thought that was the most important issue in this election. Now, why is that so low, even the 0.25%? And I think it's because what many of the Muslims voting for their given candidates in this election were actually voting for Islam itself in many ways, and the advantages that they could get through the candidate they were voting for Islam and for their community specifically, on the basis of how it would treat Muslims. And one of the things that the Muslim vote did is they came up with 18 demands for what they wanted. And this was to put pressure on the main parties like Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. And those included things related to the war, like recognizing a Palestinian state, a travel ban for Israeli politicians, ending the military ties with Israel, those kind of things. But they also wanted other things which are also have a big impact on the UK, or could do, accepting the definition of Islamophobia. Now, the definition of Islamophobia is kind of a circular definition, which basically, in essence, means that whatever we think Islamophobia is, or whatever any given individual claims is Islamophobic, which is essentially a blasphemy law by the back door. And they also wanted some money, of course, because money is often behind a lot of this. So they wanted Sharia compliant pensions to be given to every workplace. And they wanted 7% of local government pensions and public sector pensions to go to ethical or Islamic funds. Now, this is at the same time as arguing for a BDS agenda as well. So essentially, they want government money to go to Islamic causes and to be removed from Jewish causes, or if you want to call it a Jewish cause, from Israel. A lot of that is what's going on here. It's a much broader agenda than just the war, although you still hear people at the count shouting "This is for Gaza" when they won, or candidates who were elected were interrupted with shouts of "Free Palestine" by those who nearly won but didn't quite manage to win, and were annoyed at the fact and wanted to make sure that the cameras picked up their call to arms.
Yeah, and this issue is not something peculiar to the United Kingdom. The United States is just starting to see what this means. And make no mistake, this problem is not going to go away in the United States. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because the Muslim population is not going to shrink. They're not going to go away, and they're certainly not going to integrate in the society in the way multiculturalism is supposed to do. These people keep their identity and follow their ideas. And it's their ideas which are behind the actions, often violent actions, that they often take. Don't believe me, just read the Quran. You can find an English version or whatever language version of the Quran. Just read it and see how much dripping hate is this thing covered in. Every time a politician says religious peace, is lying through the teeth, or they're pig ignorant. Because the Quran is not shy about telling you what they want to do with the Jews in the first place, and with every other infidel. You either convert or you die. That's your choice. And it's pretty black and white. So And the fact that the people, especially politicians here in the West, appease this kind of mentality all the time, this kind of ideology, it means that the people who foment this kind of racism, the people behind the Muslim vote, for example, whose only interest is to push sectarianism ahead and take advantage of it, are using our infrastructures, are using our altruism to further their objectives. So much so that this organization, the Muslim Vote, wasn't just claiming votes for our people, but they were quite happy to suggest people from the left or other candidates on the left, which were chosen by them, and inviting other Muslims to vote for these people in order to further their demands. Again, the party that they were suggesting were always on the left, Green Party, Lib Dems, and most of them actually ended up still voting for Labour because, let's not forget that our Prime Minister and his deputy were the first people on their knees during the BLM riots. They were on their knees. That's a picture and a half, isn't it? The Prime Minister of Britain on his knees in front of a bunch of Marxists who were just demanding for more benefits, effectively. And so appeasing these people is not going to go away. It's not going to make them understand how Western values work, and they're not going to accept them. They're going to take an inch and take it more and more and more and more. You're never going to satisfy these people until we live under Sharia law, and that's their goal ultimately. They see everything in the light of their religious-based racism, and we see that unfold in the Middle East. Israel is just not allowed to exist because the Quran tells them Israel shouldn't exist, and Jews should be all murdered.
Yeah, I'm still stuck on Sharia-compliant pensions. I'm wondering what that is. I'm sure it doesn't involve interest because that's kind of Jewy, but it's maybe something where you put a certain amount of money and get an additional percentage that is completely not. Anyway, by the way, Chandler says, I don't like Candace Owens, but she's very hot. It's completely irrelevant, but I just had to read that and say, really? But that's a topic for another day. Michael.
Yeah, I guess people forget. Chamberlain, who came from your side of the pond, he appeased Hitler, and we all know how well that worked. We appeased, after 9/11, the U.S. did a rather pathetic job. First of all, publicly, and in terms of leadership, horrendous job, speaking about what Islamic militancy was all about, even after airplanes ran into the World Trade Center buildings, the Pentagon, and so on, in a field in Pennsylvania. And by the way, folks, hurt the world economy, which harmed the poorer countries far worse than it harmed the wealthier countries, and led to a lot more misery in a lot of the countries that are Muslim, because they tend to be the poorer countries, mostly because capitalism is not part of the goal of those countries. We as Americans did a pathetic job after that. Even the so-called right wing of our country couldn't actually enunciate a philosophy, and we decided to go after Iraq because, frankly, Bush II was upset that Bush I didn't get to finish off Iraq. I mean, we had some of our most important people faking data, but the point of the matter is that we did have people that were cheering 9/11 much more quietly than they do today. We have the Squad now in America, this group of 4 or 5. I think it went down by one. I think one of them just lost, thankfully. Pro-communist, pro-Islamic, which is a remarkable combination if you think about it, because you get people who are atheist combined with people who are the most devout religious types, supposedly. But it's all about squashing progress, and it's all about eliminating any success and neutralizing and neutering capitalism so that we can all go back and live like we lived in the 7th century. And if you don't believe me, take a look at what they stand for and what they want to do. They are all about destruction. You cannot show me a country that is serious about Islam that has been a successful country. There are countries that have decided to break out. The United Arab Emirates decided they were going to relax a lot of this stuff and essentially add in capitalism, mix it in, and kind of quiet down on the Islamic part. You got to dress up the women a little bit and all, but let's not get into it too deeply, and we'll just basically make ourselves a mecca for tourists, including women, across the entire world. It is a disgrace by our leadership, but it is worse that our electors, that those of us have elected these people and continue to be unable to find leaders that can simply state the facts. The facts are clear as day. You had in the UK, you had, post 9/11, you had subway bombings where your underground was bombed by Islamic militants. Spain had this, some of the most anti-Israel, anti-Jewish people coming out of Spain, and yet they suffered Islamic terror attacks. And like you said, both Marco and Richard, everybody wants to appease these folks. There is no appeasement. This is called annihilation. It's the same thing that but Lenin used to say, or Trotsky used to say about communism. The reason it hasn't worked is because the entire world hasn't been made communist. So we're going to annihilate everybody that's capitalist and convert everybody to communism, and then it'll work. And this is the same crap that we're hearing now with a different guise and a different spin. And we seem to want to put up with it. The reason I am so disappointed, not only in the European leaders in general, Canada, which has become basically a poster child for advertising pro-Gaza, pro-terrorist stuff, but America, shamefully, has had no real leadership in this regard. And a president who's clearly demented, and we've said this before on here before the debate, and we'll say it again, he's clearly demented. He's lost. We don't know who's running the show, but what's clear is they don't have a backbone. And this will not stop until we as the electorate start to elect leaders who just simply say, we're not doing that. We were built on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is not part of Islam. None of that is part of Islam. Life is cheap. You heard the Palestinians say the best Palestinians are dead Palestinians. There is no liberty. It's all determined by law. And happiness is what we decide you should be happy about. And frankly, it's only reserved for the leadership. And we need to stop.
In President Biden's defense, as he said a few days ago on the radio, he is the first Black vice president or something. Anyway, by the way, the squad member who lost his seat, lost in the primary, blamed the Jews, of course. We covered that on this show. He still has a few more months to do some damage, so it's not over yet with him, but hopefully it will be with others as well soon. Couple of other points I wanted to make. By the way, the chat is last I checked, see maybe it's changed a little bit, but the whole conversation is about Candace Owens's hotness or lack thereof. This is a very un-Islamic conversation, but anyway. By the way, Keir Starmer tweeted something. I don't have it right now, but maybe I'll look at it yesterday. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago when it was the 19-year anniversary of the 7/7 bombings? And he tweeted about it, and he really seemed to forget to mention what the motivation is behind it. Yeah, when there's a terrorist attack, we don't have widespread support showing of support here in the UK unless it's a terrorist attack in Israel or against Jews. But we don't identify the problem. Richard, this was earlier on in the show, but you mentioned something about not to let the fact that it's 5 MPs who were elected over this confuse us. Yeah, well, we talked in our post-election shows about the first past the post system here in the UK. We talked about the Reform Party, Reform UK, who got 5 seats as well. But I don't know if you remember the exact percentage of the vote, but like a percentage that if this was proportional representation, they would be in the many dozens, right? So at least. Yeah, and by the way, reform also came in second in many places. So yeah, in many places we also saw that with the pro-Hamas vote being strong, maybe not strong enough to win that seat, but strong enough that those of us who don't want to see that become even more those ideas become even more mainstream than they already are should really be concerned. Thank you, Equal to Reality, for the super chat. Equal to Reality asks, is it time to move to Argentina? I'm asking that question as well. Maybe not quite, but yeah, that's kind of one of the only places where things seem to be moving in the right direction. Yeah, Richard.
Yeah. So on your point there about other parties, I do want to home in on a few people there that to indicate what we're talking about here. I mean, take the Liberal Democrats, for example. So they came in third in terms of number of seats. They increased their vote from about 10, 11 seats to up to 72 seats they got. Now, the leader of their party called for an immediate bilateral ceasefire. He said back in November that the military solution to eliminate Hamas would not be possible. And he's called for sanctions on Israeli settlers, and including those in government that support them, like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. So he's already laid out his ground. Now, I'm not saying that's entirely the reason that people vote Liberal Democrat, but this is part of the problem: is that people are voting for reasons they don't understand because they're not looking at the fuller picture. Now,
And they got 72 seats, you said. Do we know if all their MPs are virgins?
No, but I can tell you about some sexual preferences of some of their other MPs. This woman's quite interesting. She's a classic. Layla Moran. Now she's their spokesperson. I better go with spokesperson for foreign affairs. Now she's the first MP of Palestinian descent and has extended family in Gaza. And she manages to get full intersectionality points by also being the first pansexual MP. Now, how that works, and if she actually, lived in Gaza under any Palestinian organization, she'd be first off the roof, no doubt. But she's been elected the MP of Oxford again, of an Oxford constituency again, and she's their lead voice on foreign affairs within the Liberal Democrats. And then you could move to the Green Party. Now, the Green Party leader, they have two leaders because they're so egalitarian, they want a man and a woman, if they know what that is. Then her name is Carla Denyer. Now, she's, to summarize her, she's a bisexual, vegan, non-theist Quaker. I'll let you dissect that in your own time because that takes some work. But what has she said? She's just been elected in Bristol as an MP. She's in favour of suspending arms sales to Israel. She supported South Africa in its case against Israeli genocide. She's come out in favour of the ICC and talked about the amount of evidence that Israel is not acting within international law at the moment. And she's a Green Party, but people vote Green because they think, oh, I like clean rivers. But this is part of the wider picture, and it's part of some of the reason that the Muslim vote in certain constituencies, including Bristol being another lefty hotbed in the UK, where they like to push statues into the river if they suddenly discover somebody's got slavery links in the past, and then not get charged for vandalism because of the legal profession decides that they've got a good cause. So all of that is taking place at the moment. So this is just some of the reasons why I say you can't just focus on the Workers' Party of George Galloway or these independent candidates, but some of these other parties that are more mainstream, obviously more established, but obviously have attracted a lot of Muslim votes because of their strong anti-Israel, pro-Palestine approach.
So quick follow-up, because Clementine asks a really good question. Why do we need to know she's bisexual? Why is it that people run on here's what I like to do in the privacy of my own bedroom ticket? Like, in what sense is this a relevant thing when voting?
Well, it goes back to what Michael was saying. people are gutless morons when it comes to voting for these gutless morons who present themselves as candidates. And it's cowardice, nothing less but cowardice. When Keir Starmer begs on his knees for the Marxists, or his deputy goes from mosque to mosque begging for support. I promise you, I will ask for a Palestine state and ceasefire. And even Jess Phillips, who's an MP who just scraped through against the Muslim vote, because and she claimed that a campaign was effectively marred by lots of violence, intimidation, and she never mentioned from whom. She never mentioned the Muslim side who was actually intimidating me. Another coward who thankfully lost his job, unfortunately, because a jihadi candidate won. But Jonathan Ashford, again, he complained about the intimidation, people masked turning up at events and causing hassle, but he never condemns who they are. And what really annoys me, Jess Phillips, the woman who complained, oh, we've been intimidated and blah, 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 blah. And she even says something like, people were told that God would judge them. God, meaning Allah. But she said God. She translated for us because we are so stupid. We don't understand what Allah means, what it stands for. So she decided to pretend, she still lives in a lovely place where people are not prepared to intimidate and trying and effectively steal the election just using violence. What do you expect? This kind of candidates, kind of caliber of people grovel, ask for forgiveness. If you scowl at them, they just, they don't live a principle. That's exactly the problem. If you haven't got any principle, what Richard was talking about, the Bristol, the toppling of statue loosely related to slavery. Well, if you say that stealing is bad as a principle, but then you allow people to steal up to £100 or $100, whatever, you just throw the principle in the water. So how are people supposed to live by a principle which has been all shattered? If you say that committing crime is wrong, damaging things is wrong, and then you throw a statue in a river, but you say, oh, that's fine because people really were convinced that this was something wrong attached to this. Well, you just again thrash the whole idea, principle behind committing criminal damage. And and these people keep doing this. They keep setting red lines and moving them forward and backwards according to their needs. This kind of pragmatism is what creates a problem. And following more and more pragmatism is not going to lead you anywhere apart from, Sharia law.
So, Michael, on Thursday, on election day, Jeremy Corbyn, I think the most prominent of Hamas's MPs, tweeted, "Today, Palestine is on the ballot." And there was a very witty response from a parody account saying, "The Palestinians would like to know what's a ballot." But that's kind of, that's where they're kind of consistently inconsistent, the representatives of the Palestinians here in the West, advocating on the one hand for Islamic theocrat terrorists, and on the other hand for things that would get them executed, maybe next in line after the Jews, but would get them executed if the people they support actually won and got their way. Should we actually see that as in some way a positive when it comes to within Western societies, like in the UK, if the Muslim vote is going to a Jeremy Corbyn, who I don't think he identifies as pansexual, but to him or to somebody else who says the kinds of things that you would never hear in one of those countries, does it mean that maybe we shouldn't be too worried?
No, I think we should be worried because, as Marco said, the people voting are ignorant, and they're purposely blind, meaning that's their decision. I think there's a lot of both, frankly. First of all, there's always this implication that if we just do X, Like if we just have a bilateral ceasefire in Gaza, then mysteriously this great government is going to come into Gaza to rule it, and Israel will kind of back off, and the whole problem gets fixed. Because if we just did this, it would work. The problem is that this keeps getting longer and longer and bigger, and it frankly never happens. And then eventually you're on the other end of a rifle or a gun, and you're dead, and your family's dead, or slaves. And we know this from history. There's no question, like you said, Marco, that when we stop enforcing laws, things just get worse. We see that in New York City. I mean, it's as simple as night and day. When you had people that put up with zero criminality in New York City, there was a lot less trash, there was a lot less crime, there was a lot less homelessness, and visitors came and they enjoyed themselves. And now many people won't even visit New York City, Manhattan anymore, because it is a pigsty. It's a disgrace. It's an embarrassment, all in the name of social justice. And it's the same exact problem here. The people that we're talking about, these bisexuals, pansexuals, whatever, really somehow think that the new Hamas, V2, would put up with them because they supported them. But we all know what happens, and we've seen it in history. Sure, you help the new party get into power, and then the new party blows you away. And that's exactly what is going to happen here. The last point I'll make, though, is that it just goes back to the lack of leadership and the lack of the electorate to actually seek those people that have some principles. The principles are not that hard. They're the same principles that existed since the Greeks sort of invented civilization and Western thought began. And we've refined them. And we in the Western world have completely lost it. I want to just mention that we have two big problems in the West, in addition to the government, and they feed off of each other. One thing is the news services, and the second one, of course, is the universities and even the high schools. And I think, frankly, these three groups, the electorate, the news, and the education, higher education, so-called higher education systems, have colluded to basically say that 1 + 1 is 3, that you can have your cake and eat it too. And by the way, nobody has to work for it because there's just plenty to go around. The implication being all those who produce will actually just give it away, because we all like to work our butts off for somebody else, which is obviously not human. And I think we have to consider all of these things when we're looking at these so-called new progressive philosophies and understand what a pile of rubbish they are and call it that.
Richard, I don't know if you remember back in maybe October or November, there was a by-election in a local council here. I believe it was Neum Council and an independent one, and very much one on a Hamas ticket. Then I tweeted something about her being a Hamas supporter or terrorism supporter or something like that, and got some sort of reply, something to the effect of delete this or else. And I chose or else. But I do realize I don't live in America. We don't have a First Amendment here. We have hate speech laws. We have hate speech laws that, you know, I don't know how clear they are, but I know, you know, there was a story, was it a week ago, that a 12-year-old Jewish kid got a knock on the door from the police because he tweeted something about Hamas should be annihilated. On the other hand, it's kind of easy to knock on the door of a 12-year-old Jewish kid, but Mohammed Hijab, a famous Islamist here in the UK, said something about, you know, basically justifying sex between a grown man and a 13-year-old, and said something like, what is it, age of consent, or pedophilia is arbitrary, the age where something like that. And we've heard Dili Hussein, another advocate for Islamism in the UK, tweet. I remember it almost verbatim. It was something like, Muslims don't have to abide by arbitrary Western liberal age of consent laws. We have a lot of that, and we have law enforcement being afraid to enforce the law. I think with Muslim communities, I don't think people could get away with advocating for pedophilia unless they are part of a Muslim community in the UK. Where am I headed with this? Well, actually, with this with the current government, it is not formed with the five uh, advocates for Hamas who were elected, but it is formed by people who are more sympathetic to that cause and less um, less eager to let such communities do their own thing, whatever their own thing might be. And the conservatives were pretty eager. So being pretty eager to let that happen. With Labor being more eager to let that happen, how are hate speech laws and the like going to be affected, and how are we going to be affected by them? And I'm keeping an eye to see if anybody shows up at my office over this show. But yeah.
That's a very interesting question, Razi. And I think some of the early appointments in Keir Starmer's first couple of days in office are quite revealing on that score as well. They show the impact of this Muslim vote, and of course the need to appease it for future elections. And we've seen, as you said, by-elections since October the 7th, in particular, by-elections, local elections, right up to this general election, being little test beds for the extent to which the Muslim vote could cut through in different ways, whether that's involved staying with a party, trying to change that party from within, or peeling off if you didn't get an answer you wanted, setting up your own and standing as a candidate. Now, a couple of those examples of who Keir Starmer's appointed, I think, are telling. So let's have a look at Shabana Mahmood. She stood in Birmingham. Now, her constituency is half Muslim, and she's Muslim, of course. Her vote went down by 40%. But she still got the seat. Now, back in 2014, she was arguing for the BDS movement even back then, and arguing for a free Palestine. And Keir Starmer has just appointed her Secretary of State for Justice. So she's in that head position for Secretary of State for Justice. So and of course that covers all sorts of areas, including, of course, I think it covers the prisons as well, which we know that already they've announced they want to let a lot of prisoners go from British jails because of capacity problems. And we know that prisons are also a hotbed of conversion to Islam, and that there is quite a problem there as well. Also, let's look at this guy, Richard Hermer. Now, he used to work at the same legal office as Keir Starmer. And he gave advice to the Labour Party back in July. So this is before October the 7th. He advised Labour that they should allow public bodies to boycott Israel. And he was one of those 8 prominent Jewish lawyers who wrote a letter in October, after October the 7th, reminding Israel of their international obligations and reminding them that, quote, collective punishment is prohibited by the laws of war. Now, why am I mentioning this guy? Because he didn't stand as a member of parliament, but he's just been parachuted into the upper chamber, given a peerage, given a title, which puts him in the upper chamber, and which allows Keir Starmer to then appoint him as the new Attorney General. So the top legal mind in the country is now this guy I've just described. So all of these things indicate the direction of travel we're heading in, and that to focus on 5 independent candidates is to miss the point. Significant as that is, because it's the impact on the wider, bigger parties responding to this pressure of millions of voters who arguably they have taken for granted in many ways, or assumed they would always have the Muslim vote, but are now that vote is being increasingly used to pressure them to take certain stances on foreign affairs on behalf of the whole country, of course. So
and of course, the Labour Party doesn't need these 5 jihadi MPs, effectively, because if you have a Labour Party candidate who's won in an area, in a constituency with high Muslim population, it's because they already capitulated to them, because they already accepted or begged for their votes, or because they already asked for a ceasefire and they were already on board from the very beginning. So, I mean, let's not forget Keir Starmer, yeah, was number one guy, right-hand guy, hand man for Corbyn, a notorious anti-Semite. It was one of these five jihadi candidates who just won the independent seat. I mean, four times he refused to vote in 19 for the general election, which would have ousted Corbyn. And twice in 17 and 19, he campaigned for Corbyn, knowing very well he was an anti-Semite and was turning the party towards an anti-Semitic direction. Now, the Labour Party was eventually fined and found breaching the law for anti-Semitism. They were so incredibly anti-Semitic in their policies, which they actually breached the diversity laws that we have here in Britain. But this is supposed to be the prime minister who's changed the party. He's the same guy who was there when anti-Semitism was going on. And I'm supposed there now to believe this guy is going to change direction, not least because it's the most pragmatist. I mean, he even says in his speech in number 10, before he even went in, that he hasn't got any ideology. He's just there to serve the need of the nation. Well, the need of the nation is the need of the people who keep it in power. And the people who keep it in power are the very same people who threaten him to knock him off this perch if he stops being, not pro Hamas enough.
Michael.
Look, I don't think there's any obvious or good solutions to that. If you believe Atlas Shrugged, then we should all certainly think about shrugging and moving to countries where we would be appreciated. And I would strongly urge, I write a lot on LinkedIn because people ask silly questions like, can you believe the UN is so anti-Semitic? And can you believe the ICC is so anti-Semitic? Clearly, Western governments, many of them, want to eliminate any vestiges of class or philosophy or having a backbone or believing in even so-called Western values. We'll probably have to rename these. We'll have to change them to libertarian values or democratic values or something, because the West no longer stands, at least not vociferously stands for these things. We need to stop supporting these people with money. We need to stop voting for them. And we all need to think really hard about whether we want to contribute to the societies that would support our destruction, to use very Randian terms. And frankly, in the Middle East, there's one country that's an asset to the world, period. The rest of them, the only thing they provide is oil and an occasional good place to scuba dive. But the world seems to hate us in Israel for that. The world hates the West. The world hates the United States. We have death to America, death to Israel in the same breath. And we have politicians now in the West that are accepting those statements. Is what you're saying. We have it in the US as well. Our Democratic Party has accepted those statements. And our former president of Harvard put it very nicely. It all depends on the context. And clearly, the historical context right now supports that these statements are okay. We cannot continue to support this. In everything we do, we have to realize it's connected. You said it nicely, both of you, Marco and Richard, said it nicely, that you have to look a little bit more deeply into this stuff. And frankly, Jewish people and capitalists, which are pretty much probably everybody on this call, and libertarians have got to start to wake up and do something about this. It doesn't mean we can all become professional politicians, nor should we. But our money and our energy and our time and our votes need to go in a different direction. And we need to stand up for these things with clarity, philosophy, and values that got the world to where it is today, largely on the West's back.
I agree. And if anybody wants to pull their funding from their favorite mosque, there is a link to the Ayn Rand Center UK membership page in the chat where you can sign up and support our work and get access to additional content and perks. By the way, I see the French election mentioned in the chat. One of the reasons we didn't do a whole show on the French elections is because we just don't know enough, but as far as we can tell, Hamas won that election, or at least got the most number of seats. That's maybe a bit of an exaggeration because it was some coalition of the left, but in France, I think the left is when we say the left, it's much worse than what we're used to when we think of the left, and we're used to pretty bad. So yeah. It's yeah, as you mentioned, Michael. Yeah, the world and the West is going in a bad direction. Let's hope that Argentina does well quickly enough, and we can all move there. There's already an Ayn Rand Center Latin America, but hopefully they'll they're hiring. Any parting thoughts, Richard, Marco?
Um, well, just on the quickly on the France point, it's worth noting that Le Pen's party got the largest percentage of the popular vote with 37%. Now she's called far right. That's already these terms are stupid and don't match from one country to another. And there's all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't apply that term here or in other parts of Europe even. But and that's no defense against France is a right mess at the moment, to say the least, and it's going to be stuck in some considerable turmoil. And I don't think that just on your point about Argentina and Milei, for example, I don't think that there is a safe haven that you can move to, even if you have at the moment a leader who's doing good things that you can recognize as being of the kind of agenda that we would all support, such as Milei. How long is that last? How guaranteed is it? Is Milei going to get Argentina back on its feet, and then the socialists are going to raid the coffers again the day after? I mean, to what extent can you trust politicians to have changed the country if the culture doesn't also change? And the culture obviously has to come first, and the politics is down the line. So none of what we're looking at here in any country is going to be led by the politics. It's going to be led from the bottom up, by education, by culture, by people seeing what the moral way of approaching life really is.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence that the Labour Party, the lefty party in Britain, is the party that's got the support of the Muslims. It's not a coincidence that the left in France, the left led by Mélenchon, who's a guy who's the same metal as Corbyn, and generally the left in Europe is much more, baby communism. It's a people that they still come from the communist parties even after the 90s, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it's a coincidence that the Socialist Party in Spain is done what is done, recognizing the Palestinian state. It's a coincidence that every single lefty party is against Israel, because it's the morality of the left. This kind of unearned claim that they put on the producers, and the fact that capitalism is based on a moral, on the morality of it, what makes it legitimate. They try and attack it. And the kind of morality that the left is pushing is the morality of hate, the morality of destruction, and the morality of destroy the other guy because we're not good enough to put up something else. And that's ultimately why the left is always on the side against Israel.
Yeah, and it's a good point about morality. Yeah, Richard, as you say, Argentina, we have no guarantee that it's going to be continued, whatever Milei does, because this was not a philosophical revolution. This was a popular person who won an election. And we've seen, although I don't think she was that popular, but we've seen Margaret Thatcher in this country really take this country from a very bad state and improved it. And as we've said on this show, that shows that the practical case for capitalism is insufficient, considering the kind of people who are leading the country now and have been serious candidates since. You do need a moral and cultural revolution. Michael.
And just to close and agree with that, but when your professors are professing the opposite for reasons that still are unclear, maybe it's because, frankly, libertarian type values are so simple and they've been around for so long, you can't write new papers. I don't understand why it's so difficult and why we have to come up with baloney and 1 + 1 = 3, which, by the way, has been proposed in the US. to write new papers and be promoted. And then you've got news reporters who know better, and we've talked about this on the show as well, who just continue to say the same crap and support and pretend to give balanced views when they understand destruction. All you need to do is look at one Palestinian rally, pro-Gaza rally, and you see only destruction. You saw the same thing with Black Lives Matter. Someone told me it was the same as the Vietnam War, and the answer was it's not. At least in the Vietnam War protests, there was a legitimate question about what we were doing in America. There is no legitimate question with Black Lives Matter and what they did and the destruction that they wreaked, by the way, during COVID without masks and so on and so forth. It's all destructive. And you're right, we as the producers need to stop supporting it.
Thank you, Christian, for the super chat. Christian says the anti-Semite Mélenchon got 86 seats, but bad enough. The other leftist parties are less bad regarding Israel. Yeah, I kind of qualified that statement after I made it, but yeah, look, even the non-left in France, certainly the center, I don't think they are pro-Israel at all. They just maybe are nowhere near as bad.
Well, Macron was a finance minister during the Socialist Party, but
all right, Michael, you have to leave. Where can people find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Kaufman 2Fs. Thanks, guys. I got to run. Thanks.
Marco?
Bye-bye.
You can find us on the Briefly Objective sister channel to this, link below in the description.
All right, Marco, did you just want to finish the thought that you were...
no.
All right, well then, I'm Razi Ginsburg on X. Marco, Richard, and Michael will all be back for tomorrow's show, the reality show. Before that, we have the Daily Objective. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.